that.
Did you like it?
Yeah, I loved it.
I'm very disappointed. We were hoping that there would be a second season.
Yeah, I saw it a while ago.
Yeah, there's no second season.
It was excellent.
Yeah, the girl was terrific.
Yeah, it was weird because it was in Spain, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it was that many Nazis who escaped the asylum in Spain.
Yeah, you don't really think of Spain. Right.
They had, I guess it's because of Franco.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a great show. When do you go back?
September 1st.
Okay. A good summer?
Great summer.
Where have you been?
So I was in Israel for Global Tomorrow,
That's right.
and then Washington for.
Did you get to know Ted Deutsch?
I did.
Yeah.
As much as you can. I mean, he travels a lot.
Yeah.
It was insane. I mean, you expect his calendar to be busy, but
It's crazy.
really busy.
That's amazing.
It was really a great experience.
Very cool. All right, welcome home.
Thank you.
So, all right, we better get started. I feel like we're so spread out, even with all the empty seats. Shabbat Shalom. Good to see you. Here we go. Ready? V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam Beini uven b'nei Yisrael Oti le'olam Oti le'olam V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et ha-shamayim ve'et ha'aretz v'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam Uvayom hashvi shavat vaynafash Shavat vaynafash Shavat vaynafash V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Borei peri hagafen Amen. L'chaim.
Just waiting for Rosh Hashanah.
Okay, Torah Study blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. Okay, so today's class is a little bit different in that we're going to focus on halakha, Jewish law, and how Jewish law develops and how we derive it from Torah. And there's a lot of material to get to. So the more material we need to get to, the less we need to hear from you. So this is, in other words, I'm trying to teach here a whole course worth of material in the short time that we have. But before we do that, I do want to ask a question, and that is, make sure we're all on the same page. What is halakha? When we say halakha, what do we mean?
Law.
Jewish law. Halakha, okay. So technically the word halakha means going, right? The way of going. But that word has come to mean Jewish law. Now, how do you, if you wanted to find out halacha, if you wanted to find out what Jewish law is, how do you know? If you were telling someone who didn't know anything about Judaism, where's Jewish law, where would you tell them to look?
Mishnah.
Oh, no, not yet. Okay, a variety of answers. So if Shulchan Aruch, what else? Talmud. Pirkei Avot, potentially, which is part of the Mishnah, which is part of the Talmud. Nobody said Torah, which is right. I mean, look, if you looked in the Torah and it said, don't kill, okay, seems to make sense. Then the Talmud's going to come and say, are there cases where it's permissible? Like if someone's about to kill you, and the only way to save your life is to kill them. Can you do it? Or should you allow them to kill you? Because it's better that you be killed by them than you kill them. Yeah, I mean, so with every single halacha in the Torah, with every single mitzvah in the Torah, there are then questions. Well, what if? Right? Clear so far? So if you wanted to look to the Talmud, what you would get are ideas and debates. And once in a while it'll tell you, Hilchata, here's the law. But a lot of times it doesn't. A lot of times it'll tell you, this is what they used to do, okay, fine. But then you read the comments around the side. And what do the comments around the side of the Talmud say? We don't do it that way anymore. Here's how we do it now. Because different, okay, so.
Is that the responsa?
No, those are the commentaries. Responsa is late, post-Talmudic questions and answers. So a responsa means someone wrote a letter to Maimonides and said, what do I do here? And Maimonides wrote an answer and said, here's what you do. In other words, I'm asking you a question that this case never came up in the Talmud, so we don't know what to do. What do you So he looks back and says, I think this is what they do in American jurisprudence too. You look back at other precedents and try to figure out how does the law apply to the case that you're dealing with that no one's ever dealt with before. And that's responsa. In the year 1000, in the century, in the 1000s, there was a rabbi in Fez, Morocco, named Rabbi Yitzhak Alfasi. And he did something that no one had ever done before, which is he tried to summarize the whole Talmud and write down what the law was in his day and age for every law. And that was the first time anyone had ever done that. And that book was called the Book of Laws, Sefer HaHalachot. Okay? He's known as the Rif, Rabbi Yitzhak Alfasi. About 150 to 200 years later, Maimonides did the same thing. And he wrote the Mishnah Torah. Okay? And about 300 years after that, Joseph Caro, living in Sfat, wrote another one. Actually, in the 1400s, there was another one called the Torah, written by a rabbi named Jacob ben Asher. Now, the one that was written in the 1500s by Joseph Caro, called the Shulchan Aruch, became the definitive law code. Why? Because he summarized the first three. So what he did was he said there's three others that everyone accepts: Rif, Torah, and Maimonides. But those three don't always agree. So what did Joseph Caro do? He went to those three and took the majority. Wherever two of the three said one view, he said that's the view. They're called what he called the three pillars. And that became the definitive law code because he took the majority of the other three. Now, at the same time that he was doing that, there was a rabbi in Krakow, Poland, named Rabbi Moses Israelis, who we know as the Ramah. If you've been to Krakow, you go to his synagogue, and he's buried in the back in the cemetery. And the Ramah said, yes, we agree with the Shulchan Aruch, but there are some customs that are different. And Rabbi Joseph Caro is looking at it from a Sephardic perspective, and I'm looking at it from an Ashkenazic perspective, and I'm going to give you the differences of how we do it in Europe compared to what he's doing over there in Tzfat. And so whenever you read the Shulchan Aruch, you also have the comments alongside of it of Rabbi Moshe, of the Ramah, Rabbi Isserles. And so if you wanted halacha today, you go to Shulchan Aruch and everyone agrees on that. Okay. Now, if you want to understand the development of the law, though, you start with the Torah, you take a verse, and you go to the Talmud. And you see how the Talmud fleshes it out. But then you go through the development of the law, through the Shulchan Aruch, and then, new cases that came about ever since and for reasons why. So what I want to do today is show you the law in the Torah that is very interesting and show you how it developed. And by developing it, hopefully we'll learn two things. One, we'll learn something very interesting. But two, we'll also see how law develops. And that's why there's a lot of material here that if I was teaching this in rabbinic school, it would take me, 4 or 5 classes. We're going to do it in the, 38 minutes we have left or so. Or 48. So the issue is, in Judaism, polygamy. Okay? Polygamy that we're going to look at now in the Torah, we want to look at Deuteronomy chapter 25, beginning with verse 5. Polygamy is not something that you take lightly. You don't marry lots of women for entertainment. That's sinful. You really only do it for one case, which is what we're going to see here now in the Torah called the Levirate marriage. The Levirate marriage, Levirate in Hebrew is something we call yibum. Yibum. Now, there's an entire tractate of the Talmud on this issue. It's called Yevamot. Yevamot is the same word as yibum. Yibum means, so what I'm telling you is we're about to look at 5 verses, or 6, whatever, a handful of verses. There's an entire tractate, entire volume in the Torah on these few verses. So if you wanted to say, I'm just going to look at the Torah and I'll tell you the law, I'll say, I got another whole volume of laws that you need to look at in order to understand this one section. Now, why is it so confusing? Because when you're getting into marriage, there's a lot of interesting things. So here's the only reason you would do it. A man has a brother. Now, a married man with kids has a brother. Clear so far? The brother's married and has no kids. The brother dies. No kids. The Torah is going to tell us that the brother who's still alive can marry his brother's widow if she has no kids for the purpose of having kids with her to continue the name of her brother in the world. That's the only reason you're supposed to have polygamy. But it happens sometimes. Yes?
Doesn't that same name continue with his own name?
No.
Last name?
No, but it's not the same guy. They want, every man has his own household. And you're supposed to, the goal is for it to continue. So, yes, the last name is the same, but they didn't really go by last names. I mean, it didn't really work that way. So we have a different conception of what last name means today versus what they did. So they didn't really have last names at all. You had your name and then you're the son of. So yes, they're both the son of the same person, but the name is the first name. So, okay. So I'm going to try and run through a lot of this as quickly as I can. We'll save time for questions at the end. If you have a comment that we can't live without, that you've come up with something that's, so brilliant, by all means. But if not, let's try to get through it a little, because you can see through all of this sheet, there's a lot of material, and I've spent a tremendous amount of time this week distilling this. So I hope you appreciate it. All right, let's begin, Norman. Chapter 25, verse 5 of Deuteronomy. Torah portion, by the way, Kitetse.
When brothers dwell together, and one of them dies and leaves no offspring, the wife of the deceased shall not be married to a party outside the family. Her husband's brother shall unite with her. He shall take her as his wife and perform the lavir's duty. The first child that she bears shall be accounted to the dead brother, that his name may not be blotted out in Israel. But if the family representative does not want to marry his brother's widow shall appear before the elders in the gate and declare, my husband's brother refuses to establish a name in Israel for his brother. He will not perform the duty of a lavir.
Okay, so to answer the question, how do I know that each brother has, even though they have the same last name, right? But you look at verse 6, and that's our answer, at least from the Torah's perspective. It shall be the firstborn son whom she will bear shall stand in the name of the dead brother, and his name will not be blotted out from Israel. So in other words, it's telling you that if you don't have a kid, it's like your name is wiped out here. Now, I'm not saying that's what Reform Jews believe. I'm not saying you need to believe that. I'm just saying that's what the Torah says very clearly here in verse 6. Now, when you read verse 7, if the man will not wish to marry a sister-in-law, what if she's annoying? Right? Then his sister-in-law shall ascend to the gate. To the gate means in a public place in front of everybody, to the elders, and say, my brother-in-law is a real jerk, right? And he doesn't consent to marry. Okay, that's what it sounds. So it sounds there from the Torah that if the brother who's still alive doesn't want to do it, he's selfish, there's something wrong with him, right? That's what it sounds like. I mean, that's what she, at least from her point of view. Okay, so in that case, Edith, what happens? Verse 8.
The elders of his town shall then summon him and talk to him. If he insists, saying, I do not want to marry her.
Right, in other words, if he goes to the elders and says, have you met her? Right? Okay, let's keep going.
His brother's widow shall go up to him in the presence of the elders, pull the sandal off his foot, spit in his face, and make this declaration, thus shall be done to the family representative who will not build up his brother's house. And he may go in Israel by the name of the family of the unsandaled one.
Right. Okay, now all of this, just that's all we need. The next verse starts a whole different section. That, what we just read, has an entire tractate in the Talmud, a whole volume, hundreds and hundreds of pages, trying to explain what this means. It's called Yevamot. Now, what I would suggest is that every little clue, I mean, if you're going to write a whole tractate on just that short amount, then every little word, every little clue, everything matters. Now, it sounds like you take off a shoe and hit him over the head with it and spit in his face, that he's done something really wrong. But when we look to the law and say, well, what does the spit represent? And where does the spit go? What do you do with the shoe? What really happened? Okay? Then we start to learn some different things. Now, there are two mitzvahs here. So, and this is really, really, really interesting. The first mitzvah that we're going to say is, if you want to do yibum, so two terms. Yibum means Y-I-B-U-M, yibum. You're going to go through with it and marry your brother's widow. That's yibum. Clear? If you don't want to do it, you don't have to. There's another mitzvah. Mitzvah doesn't mean a good deed. It means a commandment. There's something else that you then have to do. And this is called chalitza. Chalitza. That Hebrew word, it's in verse 9. Chalitza, which means you're separating from her. So chalitza means you take the shoe and you do the spit. You can't do neither. You have to either go through with the marriage called yibum, or you have to perform this ceremony with the shoe and the spit. And that's called chalitza. But they're both mitzvahs. So it seems you have a choice in front of you. I can do this mitzvah, or I can do that mitzvah. But they're both mitzvahs. Can't do both, but can do one. So, what's so wrong if I have two mitzvahs in front of me with choosing the other one? Okay. So, one of the things that the rabbis are going to ask, and that the Talmud's going to deal with, is if you have two mitzvahs in front of you here, which one's better? And once we start asking that question, what are you supposed to do? Then it gets really interesting. And the reason why is because what are you supposed to do changes through time. It changes through time based on the world that the Jews at the times are living in. And that's how the halakha develops. Okay? So let's take a look. If you look at the first section of Yevamot, Ed, would you mind reading there on the sheet 39b? So we're in the Talmud now. And what we want to do is look at a series of sections from the Talmud to try to explain what happened. Okay, 39b.
We learned in a Mishnah there, which was Bechorot 13a, the mitzvah of consummating the levirate marriage takes precedence over the mitzvah of performing chalitza. This applied initially when Yevamim would have intent for the sake of fulfilling the mitzvah. Now that they do not have intent for the sake of fulfilling the mitzvah, the sages say, the mitzvah of performing chalitza takes precedence over the mitzvah of consummating the levirate marriage.
Okay, so here the Talmud is quoting somewhere else in the Talmud. And what they're saying over there in the Talmud, it says, initially. You see that word initially? If you look on the third line, initially. Initially in Hebrew is barishona. The Talmud does this once in a while. This is amazing. This is the advent of Reform Judaism. But it's a concept called barishona. Barishona means, here's how we used to do it, but it doesn't work anymore. Initially, we used to do... So one of the things was, they used to have this... the priests had different jobs in the Holy Temple. And one of the jobs was to remove the ashes from on top of where they burned the sacrifices. And the rule was, they would open the door, and they would run there. Whichever priest would get there first, he was the guy who had the honor of, cleaning the ashes. Now, you might say, what's the big deal? But, we get offended if you don't get the, lift the Torah or whatever, or open the ark. It was a big deal. They wanted the honor. So, one day, they were running up, and to go up to the thing, there was a ramp to get up top to where the altar, the Mizbeach was, where they cleaned off the thing. So they got up, two of the priests are getting there, it's neck and neck. The Levites are betting on top, everybody's watching. And one of the priests gets up and he falls off the ramp and he breaks his leg. So what does it say in the Talmud? Barishona, we used to have this race. One guy broke his leg, and you know what? Once he broke his leg, they said, we're not going to do it that way anymore. So here's how we do it now. We draw lots. And since they started drawing lots, no one ever broke their leg. But what they said was Barishona, this was the law, this is the way you're supposed to do it, but it doesn't work that way anymore. So if you want to read an interesting book about this, about how all the different forms of laws in the Talmud evolved and reformed, and how from the very beginning rabbis were changing. We used to do it this way, but we don't do it that way anymore, which we're Reformed Jews, so that's interesting to us. There's a book called The Rhetoric of Innovation, and it was written by Aaron Pankin. Aaron Pankin was the president of the Hebrew Union College who died in a tragic plane car accident a few years ago, and now they have a new president. He was an amazing guy, but that was his doctoral thesis. He turned it into a book called The Rhetoric of Innovation, where he goes through, it's very academic, but it's interesting. But students of this class could handle it. Yeah. All right, so look what he says here in Yevamot. Look what the Talmud says in Yevamot. We used to, initially, in the third line here, we would have intent for the sake of fulfilling the mitzvah. So people would do yibum. People would marry their brother's widow because it was the right thing to do. to sustain his household. But now look what he says in our day, meaning about 1,500 years ago in Talmudic times. Now they don't have the sake for the intent of fulfilling the mitzvah. We don't recommend it anymore. We think you should do chalitza. So it used to be at one point, yibum, do the marriage. But now what we recommend is don't do the marriage, do the thing with the shoe and the spit and go your separate ways. Why? Because it used to be that people did it for the sake of the mitzvah. But you know why people are doing it now? Because they think their brother had a really good-looking wife. And they've been thinking of, as soon as he started feeling chest pains, they've been thinking, And what the rabbis started to doubt the intent of people. And by the way, that's the evolution of Judaism. The further we move away from Mount Sinai, the less good Jews we are. That's the idea. But we've had our moments. But what they're saying in Yevamot here in the Talmud is, we used to think that you should do the marriage, but now because people are doing it for the wrong reasons, we'd rather you didn't do it. That's what we have so far. Okay, Ed, let's keep going. Second, actually, I've just explained the second part. So let's go now to Yevamot 54a, the second part.
The Gemara asks, didn't you derive from this phrase that the act of intercourse in this case is a mitzvah? How can the same phrase also indicate that it does not matter what the intentions of the two parties were during the act of intercourse? The Gemara answers, the fact that it is a mitzvah is derived from the verse, and if the man does not wish to take his yivamah, which is Deuteronomy 25:7, which indicates that if he wishes, he performs levirate marriage, which is preferable to chalitza. Therefore, when the verse cited above came, it indicated that levirate marriage has occurred whether the parties acted wittingly, unwittingly, or intentionally, whether due to coercion or willingly.
Okay, so by the way, you're not allowed, there are rules of who you're allowed to marry or have relations with. You're not allowed to marry your brother's wife. That's a forbidden relationship. It's illegal. So what happens is, once he dies, if they don't have kids, she reverts back to being permissible. Now, there are lots of certain cases. So say, for example, the high priest has a brother. So the high priest's brother is just a regular priest. But the high priest is the high priest. And the high priest is not allowed to marry a widow no matter what. That's the rule for the high priest. But now the high priest's brother dies and he has no kids. So there's a concept in Jewish law, aseh velo ta'aseh aseh, which means a positive mitzvah overcomes a negative mitzvah. So the positive mitzvah is you have to do yibum if your brother's wife dies. I'm sorry, if your brother dies and his wife is childless. You have to do yibum. That's the positive precept. The negative precept is you're not allowed to marry a widow if you're the high priest. That's a rule. So the positive precept overshadows the negative precept, and you take the positive one. Make sense? So in this case, even though that marriage is forbidden, you can do it, and the high priest can marry her.
There are rules that apply to one whose testings are charged, or the member is separated.
Yeah.
That person is to be set out.
Right.
What happens? Can you do the analysis there?
Okay, so yes. You are never commanded to perform a mitzvah if you are unable to perform a mitzvah. So in other words, there used to be a sacrifice called re'iyah. You know the word ro'eh? To see? Re'iyah meant you had to actually see the sacrifice. A lot of the sacrifices you didn't have to see. You give them to the priest takes it, slices and dices it, and you can go home. But the re'iyah, you had to actually see the smoke come up. That's the mitzvah, to see it. What if you're blind? You cannot see it. So what's the rule? Does God say you've sinned because you didn't see it because you're blind? Of course not. So you are exempt. So if you can't perform a mitzvah, you're exempt from it. no problem.
What if the brother, instead of dying, has his member messed up, so he can't have kids, but he's not dead? Nothing happens there?
No, not while he's alive. Not while he's alive, because the marriage, that relationship's still forbidden until he passes away.
Okay, and if the one who's left isn't married with kids, he doesn't have to marry the sister-in-law?
No. So, by the way, let's say the husband dies. And you do the yibum, and everyone agrees to it, and they want to do it. By the way, the woman has to agree also. If the woman says, I could stand his brother, but him? No way. She doesn't have to do it. She can sandal, spit, she's out. Both parties have to agree. We don't force anyone to marry anyone. Now, let's say both parties decide they want to do the yibum, they want to get married. When do they do it? They have to wait 3 months. Why do they have to wait 3 months? Very good. What if she's pregnant? Because if she is pregnant from the first husband, the marriage is impermissible because he didn't die childless. There is a baby to continue the name. Very interesting. Yeah.
What if she's beyond childbearing age?
They still do it. They still do it because you never know. Because look at Sarah. Sarah was 100 years old. So. And they had IVF.
Even if she were pregnant, it might not be a son, and the next line suggests that the husband's the brother, who's now supposed to have a child with her, is supposed to do so until she has the first son.
Right. Well, you got to give it a shot. I mean,
No, but why 3 months and why not then 10 months to see was it a son or not?
Oh yeah, it's a good question. I'm not. I mean, so it's a good point. Yeah, it's a good point. I don't know. I think at that point you could do the marriage, but if it's a son, you would say, all right, we're good. It's a really good question. I'm not 100% sure on the answer. I'll try to find out. Okay, let's go to the next page, Bavli Yavamo 20b. And this is the point that I just made, but I just want to show you that principle. See, the Talmud has a lot of principles of law. I imagine like American jurisprudence has a lot of principles of law. Like, this is always the rule. I mean, we always hold by this rule, and that's a governing principle that the law goes by. For example, if you have if someone's commanded to do a positive precept and a negative precept gets in the way, the positive precept overshadows it. So if you look at Yavamo 20b, Annabella, would you mind reading that one? As Reish Lakish said.
As Reish Lakish said about the same matter, in every place that you find a positive mitzvah and a prohibition applying to the same matter, if you can fulfill both of them together, this is best. And the positive mitzvah does not override the prohibition. And if there is not any possibility of fulfilling both, then let the positive mitzvah come and override the prohibition. Here too, in the case of levirate marriage, it is possible by way of chalitza to fulfill the positive mitzvah and not to transgress the prohibition prohibiting marriage to these women.
Okay. So let's say you have the high priest, and his brother dies and had no kids. So you would say the positive mitzvah overrides the negative mitzvah. But is that really the case here? Because here you have a built-in way out. You don't have to rely on that principle. What's the built-in way out of not doing the yibum? You have another mitzvah called chalitza. So you don't have to do it. Because in this particular case, the Torah already gives you a built-in mechanism to get out of it. Which is an interesting idea. Okay, so, but that's not always the case, but in this case it is. There's this built-in mechanism. There's two different mitzvahs here, and you have a way of getting out of it, of fulfilling the mitzvah without breaking it, which is like an interesting idea. Now, by the time we get to the 1500s, actually, let's skip that for now. Let's go one more Talmud. If you look at Yavamot 106b, did everyone see that? Okay, so one more point here. Rich? The Mishnah of Chalitza.
The Mishnah of Chalitza is performed as follows. He and his Yavema come to the court, and the scholars of the court give him advice appropriate for him, whether to enter levirate marriage or to perform Chalitza, as it is stated, and the elders of his city shall call him and speak to him.
Okay. So if you look, that verse that the Talmud quotes was one of our verses, verse 8, that we read, which said, "Then the elders of the city shall summon him and speak to him, and he shall stand and say, I do not wish to marry her." So one of the things the Talmud is asking is, well, what was, in verse 8, what was that conversation? They go to the elders. Now, one of the things to know, and if you've studied any biblical archaeology, or if you've traveled around northern Israel and you've been to places like Tel Dan, or anything that starts with Tel besides Tel Aviv, but any of the other Tels, and you see, they found that the gate of the city was where everything happened, and that was also the court. That's where the elders would sit, and all the court cases were done at the gate to the city. So when we see the elders at the gate here, it means that that's where they came. And there are a variety of different gates you can go and see. You can even go and see the gate in Hebron, where Abraham bought the cave from Ephron the Hittite, which is unbelievable. If you've never been to Hebron, it's pretty incredible. So they go in front of them, and you have now this woman. Even if both parties agree to it, they still have to go to the gate. And you have the woman who's called the Yavama, and the man whose brother died, and they speak to the elders. What do they say? What's the say? So look, this section of Talmud 106b is really interesting. The mitzvah of chalitza is performed as follows. So let's say now for certain they want to do chalitza, they don't want to get married. So the two of them come before the court, and the scholars of the court give him advice appropriate for him, whether to do this or not. So look, if they both come and say, we both want to do it, the court will probably say, great. But what does it mean? What does it mean if it's appropriate or not? What if the what if the widow of the brother who died is 15 years old? And the brother's 52. So the judges might say, no way, ridiculous, never work. Right? You know, what if there are reasons that it doesn't, what if it's clear that they hate each other? I mean, it's possible to hate your sister-in-law. Look what Rashi says on that Talmud. Go with someone that is compatible to you and do not bring quarrel into your home. Why would we want to set the two of you up to keep your brother's name going when you clearly are not compatible and you hate each other? You two, or maybe you don't hate each other, but it's not right. It's just not right. Maybe you live in two different areas that are nowhere near each other. I mean, for whatever the reason is, it's not right. Why would we do that to you? That's what Rashi says.
What about the wife of the man who's still alive? Wouldn't she possibly make his life miserable, and that's the reason for it?
Yeah, this is the great thing about, we had a couple weeks ago in the Torah portion, the Yafet Toar. So you go out to war and you find a beautiful woman, and you can't resist her. And you're in the throes of war, so you're not thinking morally because you're out there killing and all this stuff. And you say, I want to marry this woman. And, okay, so what you have to do, there are all these rules. You're not allowed to just like have relations with her. You've got to bring her home, cut off all her hair, grow her nails out, make her look terrible. And then after 3 months, if you still want her, you marry her. But imagine these guys coming home from war. And they meet this woman, a non-Jew, that they don't know anything about. And they come home. And they come into their tent. And their wife comes out to meet them from war. And they say, Sarah, meet Hagar. She's with us now. You know. So most people would think of this halacha and say, wow, look at this beautiful woman in the battlefield. I'm good. Right, yeah. So I think then what the Torah is asking is the wife of the brother who's still alive to make a sacrifice as well. But this is not unusual because we are the children of Jacob. And Jacob was married to Leah and Rachel. Now, there are a lot of problems with that because you're not allowed to marry two sisters. And Jacob married two sisters. So we say, well, he lived before the Torah. And that mitzvah didn't exist yet. But then we say, well, no, the matriarchs and patriarchs, they knew the mitzvahs. They followed the mitzvahs. So then they say, oh, yeah, but at the time he was living outside the land of Israel, and the mitzvahs that they knew about only pertain to when you were in the land of Israel. And whatever question you have, the rabbis have a loophole. They have a way around it. But you have to understand that in the world of the Talmud, polygamy wasn't abnormal. It was the norm. Everybody was doing it. It wasn't weird. Today, it's nuts. You go to jail. Or Utah. Right? But, no offense. But it's illegal there now too? Okay, fair enough. Okay, so, but back then it was no. Let's move on. We're running out of time quickly. So I want to come now to, first let's go to the 13th century, the 1200s, the Rambam. At the bottom of the page, you see where it says Rambam Hilchos Yibum 4:1. Scott.
What does the mitzvah of chalitza entail? The Yavama goes to the Yavam's place of residence and approaches the judges. They call the Yavam and give him advice that is appropriate for him and for her. If the appropriate advice is for them to perform Yibum, they advise him to perform Yibum. If the appropriate advice is for them to perform Chalitza, she is young and he's older, or she's older and he's young, they advise him to perform Chalitza. Okay, so Maimonides was born in 1135 and he died in 1204. So, sorry, I meant 12th century. So by the 12th century, Maimonides agreed with this section of the Talmud where they said, let's see if it's appropriate. We're not going to force any quarrels in the home. Shalom bayit is an important mitzvah. So I remember when I was studying, I was in Talmud class in rabbinic school. And we learned about this, we had a class called Mipnei Darkei Shalom, which means you do things for peace in the home or for peace between a husband and wife or whatever. So I was scheduled to go, I was ordained in 2002, and this was like in 2000. And I was supposed to go on a trip to Israel with the Cincinnati Federation that they invited a handful of rabbinic students on. I was packed to go, and I was really excited. But 2000 was the midst of the Second Intifada, and things were blowing up all over the place. And my wife, who at the time was not my wife, but we were engaged, was like apoplectic, that I was going to a war zone, to a place I had just been living, for a whole year, a couple of years earlier. And I just really wanted to go. So I told my professors, I'm not going to be here next week. I'm on the, every year there are a few rabbinic students who are invited. I said, I'm not going to be here next week. I'm on the trip. My Talmud professor said, great, you should be going to Israel. Good. So then, like the night before I was supposed to go, 2 bombs blew up on Ben Yehuda Street.
And I started unpacking. And I didn't go. And we had just learned that week before about Mibnei Darkesh, for peace in the home. I mean, this professor just taught us this whole concept. So I show up in class on Monday. He's like, what are you doing here? I thought you were supposed to be in Israel. I said, I decided not to go. And he was about to get mad. Like, how could you not go? You need to be there. And I said, Mipnei Darkei Shalom. He said, he said, the student had become the... No, I'm just kidding. I'm just not even close. But he wanted to get mad at me, and then he realized he couldn't. It was great. It was a great moment. All right. So now, if we say that Maimonides said that in the 12th century, if you skip up a couple of chapters there to the Shulchan Aruch on the same page, we scoot ahead 300 years or 400 years to the mid-1500s. Joseph Caro on the Shulchan Aruch, and here's what he says, the mitzvah of Yibum. Sherry.
The mitzvah of Yibum comes before the mitzvah of Chalitza. And if she does not want to do Yibum with another one of her husband's brothers, or with the eldest who wants to do Yibum, but without a satisfactory claim, she is considered rebellious. There are those who say that the mitzvah of Chalitza is more important. The Rem, a comment.
Okay, so here's what Joseph Caro says. Joseph Caro says that, listen, unless you've got a really, really good reason, Yibum is better. And if you have Yibum and Chalitza in front of you, we really want you to choose Yibum. If you have to choose Chalitza, fine, but we want you to choose Yibum. Now, keep in mind, Joseph Caro, what he says there in the Shulchan Aruch in the 1500s is Sephardic. The Ramah is Rabbi Moses Israelis, who I mentioned before, who added the Ashkenazic point of view. So in the 1500s, you just heard that Yibum, Joseph Caro says, is preferable. But now, here's the Ashkenazic point of view from Rabbi Israelis, who is known as the Ramah.
Ramah comments, she is not considered rebellious if she does not want to perform Yibum. Nevertheless, we do not force him to do Chalitza, rather they try to trick him if they are able to. For example, that they say to him, do Chalitza on the condition that she give you a mana, a coin equal to 100 zuz. And that was in the Torah.
Right, okay. And then there are other rabbis who commented on this as well. I'm just pointing out here, we don't need to delve into that so much, just pointing out that by this time, Ashkenazic and Sephardic culture had differed. And you have to think about why. The Sephardim, remember, this is post-1492. They're not in Spain. They're mainly in the Muslim areas. And they're living around Muslim communities. And the norms that they've adopted, and really that they're forced to live under, because they're being, governed by Muslim rule, dictates what Sephardic Jews might think about this. On the other hand, the Ashkenazic Jews are living in a Christian world. And their rulers are Christian, and they have maybe different views on this. And so we see that Ashkenazic and Sephardic culture differ based on the environment that they're both living in. Clear so far? And so what I'm pointing out is, we see that halakha, the Jewish law, evolves for a variety of different reasons. Not because this is what it says in the Torah, but this is because this is the world we live in. Which is a very interesting idea for Reform Jews.
What if more than one brother qualifies for the Yemonah?
Well, whoever goes first,
How is that decided?
whoever dies first. Oh, the oldest. It's the old. Yeah, it's the oldest. And I think the Torah actually mentions it. But the rule is the oldest brother. Okay. Now, let's see. Let's keep going. Next page. We may have to skip a little bit here. Okay, let's just. We already referenced 13a in Bechorah. Okay. Do you see the second page? which is the third page, really. Bavli Yevamot 39b, right? What do we have? Okay. Do you see what it says? The Gemara paraphrases. That's right.
The Gemara paraphrases the Mishnah from Tractate Behorot. Initially, when Yevamim would have intent for the sake of fulfilling the mitzvah of consummating the levirate marriage, the mitzvah of consummating the levirate marriage took precedence over the mitzvah of performing halitza. And now that they do not have intent for the sake of fulfilling the mitzvah, the sages say the mitzvah of performing halitza takes precedence over the mitzvah of consummating the levirate marriage.
Okay, we already made this point before, but I brought this again to point out that what the rabbis say is, we have halacha. Halacha is better to do yibum than chalitza. Better to get married than to spit in sandal. By the way, the spit went on the ground. You don't spit on the person. The saliva went on the ground, and the elders had to see the saliva on the ground. What exactly it represents, I'm not 100% sure. We'd need to delve further. And I ran out of time. But what they're saying is, in our day and age, because people have sort of lost the beauty of the mitzvah and they're doing it because they're tired of their wife and they think the other wife is better looking and whatever, for whatever reason, we don't think they're doing it for the right reasons anymore, so we don't do it. But here again, what I'm showing you is Jewish law, right here in the Talmud, the rabbis of the Talmud, Jewish law evolved on its own. Not because of what God said to Moses at Mount Sinai, but because of human nature. Which again is very interesting to the Reformed Jew. Halacha continued to evolve and began evolving even from the Talmud time.
So we're learning about the evolution of the law, so that's very nice. What about the topic itself? I mean, other than being of academic interest, I mean, how can this be applied to modern times?
We're getting there. We're getting there. Bear with me. I have to take you first back to the Middle Ages, but then we're going to shoot forward to modern times. I'm going to show you how it applies. Now, keep in mind that from the 1500s on, really from the 1500s on, when the Shulchan Aruch was published, with the comments of the Ramah, that Ashkenazic and Sephardic custom differ a great deal. Right? We eat different foods on Passover. There are a variety of different things. Unveilings. Sephardic Jews do unveilings after 30 days. Ashkenazic Jews do them after 11 months. Sephardic Jews will name babies after living relatives. Ashkenazic Jews won't. Neither of them are sins. It's just that's what became the custom. All right. It's not like Ashkenazic Jews eat pork and Sephardic Jews don't. No, everyone understands what the mitzvahs are. But the customs of how we go about doing what we do, it doesn't matter when you do the unveiling. You can do the unveiling whenever you want. But the custom became, Ashkenazim had one custom, Sephardic had another custom, and then once you have an established custom, you have to follow it. And okay, so that's what I'm pointing out. Now, in the year 1000, there was a very famous rabbi named Rabbeinu Gershom. Rabbeinu Gershom had a nickname called Or Legolah, which meant the light unto the diaspora. He was like the most prominent rabbi in Europe. And a lot of Ashkenazic law came from a series of laws that he made at that time to help deal with the world they were living in. And he made a rule about polygamy. And the rule about polygamy was that because we're so looked down upon and persecuted by the Christians for marrying more than, for having any type of polygamy, I'm making a rule that from now on we're not going to do the Levirate marriage. And we don't have this anymore. And since he made this rule 1,000 years ago, listen closely, Ashkenazic Jews don't do it anymore. Since then, Ashkenazic Jews have been ruled we don't do it anymore. What does that mean? It means there are some Jews in the world who still do it, and some who don't. Clear so far? Okay, so look what it says here. Can we continue? You see what it says? I just copied this off the internet. Halachic decisions on family matters in medieval Jewish history by Avram Grossman. There's just one paragraph summarizing that. Julian?
In about 1000 CE, Rabbeinu Gershom, who lived in Germany, formulated a takana decreeing herem, excommunication, upon any man who married more than one wife. This takana, like all other takanot of Rabbeinu Gershom, was approved and accepted as a binding rule for the community in conferences of the sages of Ashkenaz in later generations. This approval rendered the takanot more binding than a takana promulgated by only one sage, even if he was of important stature.
Okay, so ever since then, Rabbeinu Gershom was so much of an authority that once he said that, it became the rule. And I don't think there have been any Ashkenazic Levirate marriages since. That being said, the custom now continued only in Sephardic communities. And so in the Arab world, where all the Sephardic communities were from 1500 on, the practice continued. And it didn't really become an issue again. I mean, the issue was settled. Ashkenazim Jews didn't do it, and Sephardic Jews did. The issue didn't become an issue again until 1948. Because 1948, now you finally have another community where you have Ashkenazic Jews and Sephardic Jews for the first time living together in big numbers. And you needed a law of the land. So, the original chief rabbis in 1948, the main ones, were Ashkenazic. However, I think it was 1951, a case came up in Petach Tikva, before the chief rabbi of Petach Tikva, who would later become the Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel, and who would later become the spiritual leader of a political party called Shas. You know Shas, Aryeh Deri, one of the biggest Orthodox parties in Israel, the Sephardic party. Ovadia Yosef was their spiritual leader, and for many, many years, Ovadia Yosef, he died now 10 years ago, but Ovadia Yosef, one of the most famous rabbis in the history of the state of Israel, and was the Sephardic chief rabbi for a long, long time. I believe his son right now is the Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel. So the case came before him of what are Sephardic Jews now going to do in the land of Israel. Okay, so if you look here, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef and the Yibum controversy, shortly after. Art or Jeff, would one of you mind? Art, would one of you mind reading there? Shortly after.
All right. Shortly after the aforementioned decree was issued, a certain Yemenite immigrant to Israel found himself in a situation of Yibum and was shocked to learn that the chief rabbinate of his new host country refused to allow him to fulfill what he considered a biblical mandate to marry his sister-in-law.
Right, so the Yemenite Jews in Yemen in the 1940s, this is would have been someone who came over on the magic carpet, right? When they brought all the Yemenite Jews to Israel. The Yemenite Jews of the 1930s and 1940s did not have internet. They didn't even know what was going on in the next village. They didn't know anything about anything. These are the most disconnected Jewish community. I mean, there is no information there. There still isn't. I mean, try going to Yemen. It's like the most backward place, and it has a history of being very back. So he just assumed that's the mitzvah. Why would the chief rabbinate of this new country called Israel tell me not to perform a mitzvah? Never heard of such a thing so crazy. He just assumed you do the mitzvah. So here's what happens.
Dejected and faced with few options, the man was brought into contact with Rav Avadai Yosef, who at the time was a young 30-year-old member of the Bet Din in Petach
Tikva.
Rav Avadai decided to take up the cause of this Yemenite, and the Abim was performed under his auspices. While Rav Avadai Yosef went on, what?
Ovadia.
Ovadia Yosef went on to become world-famous halakha authority at the time. It's difficult to overstate how bold a move this was for a young rabbi. It's important to consider that in 1950, the chief rabbinate in Israel was held in much higher esteem than it is today. A great many religious Zionists of the time considered Chief Rabbi Herzog and Izzy as the supreme deciders of the halakha. They were expected to set the standard for any areas of halakha that affected all communal affairs in the state of Israel. To openly defy their decree was a direct affront to their authority. Furthermore, at the time, the Israel rabbinate was dominated by Ashkenazi figures who enjoyed virtual hegemon.
Hegemony.
Hegemony over establishing rules on religious affairs, while Sephardic authorities of note among the rabbinic establishment were few and far between. Against this backdrop, the 1951 Rav Avadai wrote a Teshrav defending this decision. Yaba Amor 6.
You can skip that.
Okay. At the core of this Teshuvah.
Teshuvah means...
Oh, yeah, come back. At the core of this Teshuvah was a principle that became his modus operandi thereabout his rabbinic career. That the old Yishuv, or Eretz Yisrael, accepted Maran Yosef Karo as the supreme authority of halakha, long before the Jewish repopulation of the Holy Land. And as such, all his decisions are halakhically binding for this place. No Sephardi living in the land of Israel would have the right to rule against Maran.
Okay, so basically what Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, who was this young 30-year-old who later became this giant, said, listen, it's always been the case that Sephardic Jews follow the Shulchan Aruch. And what Joseph Caro says, there's nothing to argue about here. We're going to continue to do that. And now that we're in the land of Israel, we're going to continue to follow. And so that is what Sephardic Jews do in the land of Israel. They follow Shulchan Aruch, and that's that. Now, the Ashkenazim say, yeah, we follow Shulchan Aruch, but we also have the Ramah. But Joseph Ovadia Yosef said, there's nothing to argue about here. We follow Shulchan Aruch, and that's what it's going to be. So that's what he said. Let me just complete this here. Little was it known at the time, but this decision and others like it marked the beginning of a revolution in the Sephardic world. Rav Ovadia ushered a renewed era of Sephardic scholarship, wherein the common Torah student who has no special pedigree, who does not possess an inside track to Kabbalah, but is rather equipped only with sound and logical arguments that are grounded within traditional halachic sources, can challenge and indeed prevail over even the most supreme authorities. This formed the basis of Rav Ovadia's modus operandi, that of lahazhir ateret leyoshna, to restore the crown to its former glory, an outlook that continues to have enormously transformative effect upon the world of Sephardic Jewry. Now, I don't believe in the state of Israel they do this anymore, but what they did establish was that we're not just going to be rolled over, and the state of Israel is automatically going to go according to the Ashkenazic way of doing things. The Sephardic customs are going to be observed here as well. And you may not realize this, but even what's going on in Israel today, and a lot of the debate now with the judicial reforms, there are very much two different sides between the Sephardic Jews and the Ashkenazic Jews. And the Sephardic Jews, pretty much support Bibi because they vote for Shas, and Shas is in the coalition with Bibi, and they do whatever Shas tells them to do. And that is, in a lot of ways, so do the Orthodox Ashkenazic parties, but there's a real difference between the Sephardic communities and the Ashkenazic communities. There are certain cities where pretty much only Sephardic Jews live, and there are certain areas where pretty much only Ashkenazic Jews live. And there's not a lot of, there's more mixing now, mostly because of the army and modern Israelis don't care. But in the Orthodox world, it's pretty distinct between the two. So what I wanted to show today, and this is a little bit different than how we usually do it. First I want to say something and then make a point. What I wanted to show today is that Jewish law has evolved not because of what God said to Moses. Well, maybe it did. Because one of the things that God said to Moses is, if a case is too baffling, go to your judges. Which means to say that you Jews now, I'm giving you the principles to go live by. Now go live by them. And what that means is you're going to have to figure things out as you go. Because here's the organizing principles. You've got to live according to these organizing principles. They're the right ones. But you then have to apply them to the world that you live in. And that's the evolution of halakha. And to think that the evolution of halakha began with Reform Judaism in the very late 1700s, early 1800s, and conservative Judaism a few years after that is patently absurd when the evolution of halakha began before it even started already in the Talmud, which you wouldn't have phrases like barishonah. Initially, this is how we did it, but now we do it this way because someone broke his leg and this doesn't make any sense, and he's 62 and she's 12, and it makes no sense, and we can't do that. And there are a million other examples I can give you. So all of that is interesting and things we should know. But I just want to make one final point, because the final issue that we're talking about is marriage. And what I think the whole thing about Yibum is, and when you consider how seriously the rabbis took it, and then a whole volume of Talmud needed to be written about this, is this. And we can go back to Rashi's comment on Yevamot that you don't want to bring quarrels into the home. The reason why there's so much discussion on these few verses of Torah is because the institution of marriage is so precious and so important. And the thought of rushing into a marriage for any reason without making sure that that relationship between a husband and a wife to be is proper and is spiritual and is meant to be, and they're compatible and all the things that you need to have, and that they're soulmates and all this stuff. If you think that the Torah would ever tell anyone to rush into marriage without giving this serious thought, you're completely and totally out of your mind. Because there's really nothing more sacred than the institution of marriage. And to think that you could just enter into this willy-nilly because someone died and all of a sudden you're going to jump into it, that would be a complete and total misreading of the Torah. And so the rabbis come and say, we're going to talk about this in great detail so that nobody should think that we would mess around with something so important. And if you just read the Torah without doing the breakdown that we did, you could very easily come to that conclusion, and you would be completely and totally misguided. So when people look at the Torah and say, oh yeah, they had polygamy, look how backwards they are, that is a complete and total misunderstanding. And this has been something that you can see that we've been battling and dealing with and confronting and trying to figure out for well over 2,000 years now. And that is the heart of how deeply Judaism takes all of these really important issues. So to think that we would just gloss over it and have something like this, you'd have to be completely out of your mind. Okay. All right. That's a lesson in halakha.
Hello? Hello?
Yes.
Hello? Can everybody hear me? I have a little, I have something to say.
Ladies and gentlemen, grab your attention for one moment.
Ladies and gentlemen, if I don't, what?
Next time, let me know.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a form. Thank you. Hello.
Test,
This is
1, 2.
a form. If you have not filled out this form, it is a form to get a constitutional amendment on the next ballot for the ability for you all to vote whether you want to allow women to choose an abortion or not. If you have not filled this out, please, we need your vote. I have them here. This is not just for abortion. This is for women who get pregnant and lose their baby and cannot have the baby removed. They can die.
So please come up to me and sign this amendment. Oh, I lost my pen.
I have. You want me to just fill it out and
Yes.
give it back to you?
Please, please. Do you have a pen here? You know what? I left my pen in my purse.
I am, yeah. September 1st.
Ohio.
It was Ohio, right?
Yeah, I think it was a Democratic victory because it's
huge.
major, but maybe in Wisconsin.
He was in Israel all summer. So he was living with his girlfriend in Israel, studying Ulpan.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I have another good friend who goes to Georgia Tech. I was mixing it up. I know it was a program through Georgia Tech.
He was originally going to do a program in Israel for Georgia Tech, but they canceled it because a bunch of the kids.
I'm going to go into the men's room. I'll meet you out.
Okay.
A bunch of the
Let me know about the holidays.
Okay, I will. Well, right now we've been doing the sign of honors, but
Okay.
thanks. No, I think he went skydiving. He didn't. I mean, he did a lot of fun stuff. But the Georgia Tech program, like, I think they had like 6 or 7 people sign up for it, and then at the last minute, because of all the crazy things happening in Israel, some of the kids dropped out. They're like, oh, I think the parents were a little concerned. And so then they ended up having like 3 kids who still wanted to go, and they're like, yeah, it's not enough.
Okay.
So the formal program, I think, that he was doing.
So he was there for an Ulpan?
Yeah, so he studies Hebrew 4 hours a day.
Wow. In Tel Aviv?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And then he did a bunch of sightseeing and things. So he didn't work, he didn't do anything, but
Well,
his Hebrew's better now.
You're right.
So,
I'm sure.
So he still wants to work. We're still trying to convince him that he should sign up and do military service there, but I don't think he has zero interest.
No? Well, I mean, military service, especially coming from Georgia Tech, it's not on the front lines, it's intelligence, it's computers.
Correct.
It's really interesting.
Yeah, that's what we've told him. Our family's connected enough, and he's smart enough. He won't end up being like a line soldier.
No.
But at the same time, it's still, one, there's the risk of being a line soldier, and two, it's still military service. Like, it's not a party.
No, it's not. It's not a walk in the park. Right. That's true.
Anyways, he's together still with the same girl, so I think it's also like, that means that it's time that they're not together.
Right. That's true. Well, the other thing is that I feel like as an American, and someone who obviously speaks fluent English, being in like a external communications.
But everyone there is fluent in English as well.